He built an empire and lost everything that truly mattered. He thought he was alone until he saw 3 children staring back at him, with his eyes, and in a hospital hallway, beside a little girl who couldn't walk, a billionaire finally learned what it means to be a father. This is not just a story. It's a piece of someone's hidden pain, quietly waiting to be heard. In today's story, we dive into a moment that can change everything, in the most unexpected way. Before we begin, where are you listening from? Canada? The US? Norway? Let us know in the comments, because stories may begin anywhere, but they connect us all. Stay with us until the very end, because sometimes, what breaks your heart can also heal it. And if you believe stories can change lives, hit subscribe. Join our journey. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment. Your voice matters here. Rain fell over the Manhattan skyline like soft whispers of forgotten memories. High above the city, in a glass tower that pierced the clouds, Alexander Wolfe sat behind his mahogany desk, lost in the sterile hum of silence. His office was pristine, lined with trophies of success, the framed Forbes covers, the gold-plated awards, and digital stock tickers blinking green. But none of it filled the quiet ache that lived in the corners of his heart. He was a man sculpted by ambition. The world knew him as the ruthless billionaire who had turned Wolfe Industries into a global tech empire, but beneath the tailored suits and commanding gaze was a man with a history he rarely let surface. 10 years ago, he had walked away from love, not because he wanted to, but because his empire demanded sacrifice. Julia, her name still tasted like regret. They had been 2 flames too wild to coexist, both passionate, both headstrong. The divorce papers came too fast, the silence afterward too loud. He never looked back. Until now. It was supposed to be a simple afternoon meeting at a philanthropic summit his PR team insisted he attend. Cameras flashed, speeches were made, and smiles were traded like currency. But then, in the crowd, a flash of red hair. Her hair, Julia's hair, and then 3 children, 2 boys and a girl, standing by her side, gripping her hands, each one with something eerily familiar. The slant of their eyebrows, the sharp cheekbones, the storm gray eyes that used to belong to him. For a moment, time didn't just pause. It fractured. Alexander froze, heart hammering like a caged drum. He blinked once, twice. The resemblance was undeniable. The question that had haunted him ever since that fleeting glimpse now echoed in his mind, over and over. Are those my children? And if they were, why hadn't she told him? He had billions in the bank, yet nothing could prepare him for the dead of a lost decade. Of birthdays missed, of lullabies unsung, of first steps, first words, and all the quiet moments in between. As the rain streaked down the windows like tears, Alexander stood up, his reflection staring back at him. Older, colder, but suddenly, not so sure anymore. Some truths hide in the shadows, waiting to be uncovered, and now he would find them. The city was soaked in rain, but Alexander Wolfe didn't seem to notice. The streets bustled with umbrellas and drenched footsteps, a sea of strangers moving with practiced indifference. But he stood still, motionless in his charcoal coat, the collar pulled high around his neck, as if waiting for something the wind itself had whispered to him. He had returned to the plaza near the summit hall, not for a meeting, not for business, but because this was where he had seen her, Julia and the 3 children who looked too much like him for it to be coincidence. That glimpse had wrecked his thoughts for days. He hadn't slept. He hadn't eaten more than a few bites. And now he was chasing shadows, hoping to make sense of the haunting. Then he saw it again. A flash of red, that unmistakable shade of auburn hair, beneath a faded red umbrella. His breath caught. She hadn't changed much, still slender, graceful, carrying herself with quiet strength. She was walking briskly across the square, one hand holding the umbrella, the other clutching a boy's tiny fingers. 2 more children trailed behind her, a girl and another boy, sharing a backpack and giggling under the same umbrella. Alexander didn't think. He moved. "Julia!" he called, but the rain swallowed his voice. He picked up his pace, weaving through the crowd, heart pounding like a drum in his chest. His Italian leather shoes slapped the wet pavement, splashing like a man desperate to reclaim something lost. "Closer. Julia!" he called again, louder this time. She stopped. The children looked up, their laughter halting. When she turned, it was like the city itself slowed down. Time softened. Her eyes met his, emerald green, wide with shock, her lips parting slightly in disbelief. She didn't speak at first. Neither did he. They stood there, 2 ghosts of the same past, staring across a silence 10 years wide. "Alex," she finally said, almost like a question, almost like a memory. The name sounded foreign coming from her lips after so long. Yet it still stirred something deep inside him. You have children," he managed, trying to steady his voice. "Are they?" And Julia's eyes instantly hardened. Protective, maternal. She glanced at the kids, then back at him. Her grip on the umbrella tightened. "This isn't the time," she said quickly, the words a cold shield. "Julia, wait, please," he urged, taking a step forward. "I saw them, they look like—" "They're my children," she interrupted, eyes flashing. That's all you need to know. The youngest boy, maybe 5, clung to her coat now, peering up at Alexander with curious eyes. The older two watched silently, and he saw it again. The resemblance, the arch of the eyebrows, the jawline, those same storm gray eyes, his eyes. I have questions, Alexander said, swallowing hard. You owe me. I don't owe you anything, she snapped, her voice trembling now, not with anger, but pain. You made your choice 10 years ago, Alex. You walked away. I didn't know. You didn't ask. Her voice cracked, and the umbrella shook in her grip. You left. You were too busy building your empire. You never called. Not once. The rain seemed to fall harder. Alexander felt like the air had been punched out of his lungs. He looked at the children again, at the boy hiding behind her leg, at the girl holding her brother's hand. They were his, he knew it. Deep in his bones. Please, he said softly. Just tell me, are they mine? Julia hesitated. For the first time, she looked uncertain. Her eyes welled up, and she blinked the tears away quickly, turning to glance at the children. They don't know who you are, she whispered. They've never even heard your name. A silence fell again. Thicker now, sadder. Alexander didn't know what to say. Years of boardroom battles and billion-dollar negotiations, yet he was speechless before 3 tiny strangers who shared his blood. I just want to talk, he said. Just you and me. No lawyers, no accusations, no noise. I need to understand. Julia looked at him for a long moment. Then she gave a slow nod. Tomorrow, 4 p.m. Cafe Leora. Don't be late. And just like that, she turned and walked away. The red umbrella bobbing in the rain, 3 small figures following close behind. Alexander stood there, the world muffled by rainfall and regret. He had everything a man could want, except the years he'd never get back. As Alexander sits at Cafe Leora the next day, he learns a truth Julia never wanted to reveal. One that changes everything he thought he knew about why she left. Alexander had always believed that control was the cornerstone of power. He built empires on precision, decisions, and relentless focus. But tonight, sitting in the back seat of his Bentley with the rain still dotting the windows, he felt anything but in control. His mind reeled from the encounter hours ago. He'd followed them. Yes, he had stooped to that. Julia didn't see him. Neither did the children. He had kept his distance, blending into the background like a ghost. But he had watched them walk together, her holding the youngest child's hand as the other 2 darted ahead, laughing in the way only children do, unaware of the fractures that time can cause. He saw their faces clearly now. The eldest boy was tall, maybe 10 or 11, with dark, stormy eyes and an angular jaw. His hair, dark brown and unruly, reminded Alexander of himself at that age, when life was simple and dreams hadn't yet turned into burdens. The younger boy was smaller, with the same shade of eyes but softer features, gentler, like Julia. The girl, no more than 6, had long curls and a mischievous spark that danced in her expression. Her smile, wide and crooked, was heartbreakingly familiar. 3 echoes of a life he didn't know he'd lost. The car slowed as they reached his penthouse tower. The driver opened the door, but Alexander didn't move. He sat there for another full minute, staring out at the Manhattan skyline blurred by fog and glass. When he finally stepped out, the wind cut into him like guilt. Inside his sleek, modern apartment, everything was in its place, just as he demanded. But now the quiet felt deafening. He loosened his tie and sat by the floor, tip-ceiling windows, pouring himself a drink with a trembling hand. He couldn't shake the question from his head. Why didn't she tell me? Julia had never been the vindictive type. Passionate, yes. Emotional, often. But cruel, no. When they split, the hurt had been mutual. There were no scandals, no cheating, no courtroom fights. Just silence. She had said, you choose your legacy. I'll build mine. And then she vanished from his life. Had she been pregnant then? Had she walked away carrying his children, deciding she'd rather raise them alone than in his cold, power-hungry world? He had always feared being a father. His own childhood had been a blueprint of everything he never wanted to be. Drunk nights, slammed doors, a mother who smiled through bruises and a father who mistook control for love. Alexander swore he'd never repeat the cycle. Maybe that's why she didn't tell him. Maybe she knew he wouldn't know how to love them. A soft chime from his phone broke the stillness. A message from his private investigator, William Reese. Her name is still Julia Quinn. She lives in Brooklyn Heights under her maiden name. 3 children. No public record of a new partner. No child support claims. She kept everything off-grid. Do you want more? Alexander stared at the message. His chest tightened. She never asked for a cent. She never dragged him to court. She raised 3 children, his children, on her own, in silence. His hands curled into fists. Shame rolled through him in slow, heavy waves. How could a man who conquered industries be so blind to what truly mattered? He typed back, yes. I want everything. Them. Deleted it. Rewrote. No more surveillance. No photos. No following them. I'll handle it. He pressed send. He had to face her. Not as the billionaire, not as the man who once chased success above all else, but as a man who had just found out he was a father. He stood and walked to his study. The room was lined with blueprints, models of tech campuses, patent trophies, all things that now seemed paper-thin. On his desk was a dusty frame, a photo from 10 years ago. Julia laughing, her feet in the ocean, hair whipping in the wind, eyes closed. He had taken that photo. She didn't know he had kept it. He lifted it now, running a thumb across the glass. Tomorrow he would go to her. No security team, no lawyers. Just himself, stripped of armor, terrified and trembling. Because what do you say to the woman who raised your children without you? And what do you say to the children who have never called you Dad? Where Alexander finds the courage to confront Julia after 10 long years, but her reaction will shake the ground beneath him. The next day came like a storm inside Alexander Wolfe's chest. Time no longer obeyed the order of hours. It felt stretched, squeezed, warped. For a man whose entire existence was planned down to the last decimal, this was new territory, and terrifying. He left the black Bentley 2 blocks away from her building. No entourage, no bodyguards, no suit today. Alexander wore a navy hoodie and jeans. Clothes that didn't scream billionaire, but instead whispered, "I don't want to scare them." He carried nothing but the weight of 10 lost years and a faint hope that it wasn't too late. Brooklyn Heights was different from his world. There were no glass towers or men barking into phones. Just cobbled streets, trees whose leaves were already turning amber, and the gentle creak of bicycles and strollers. It felt human. He found her brownstone easily. Reese had sent the address, but Alexander would have recognized it anyway. The porch was painted sunflower yellow, the color Julia had always loved. She once said it made anything feel like summer. Alexander stood at the base of the stairs for a long moment, his heart thudding in his throat. It had been 10 years since he'd knocked on her door. 10 years since he held her, felt her laugh under his palm, tasted her dreams in the middle of the night. Now she was on the other side of this wooden door, and so were 3 pieces of his soul he had never met. He raised his fist and knocked. Silence. He waited. He was just about to knock again when he heard it. Soft footsteps. Then the latch turned and the door opened just a crack. Julia. She wasn't made up or dressed for show. She wore a simple sweater and jeans, her hair in a loose bun. Her face was calm, but behind her eyes was a storm. Surprise, caution, wariness, and something else, pain. "You came," she said quietly. "You asked me to," he replied, voice low. For a moment neither spoke. Then she opened the door wider and stepped aside. "Come in." The home was warm, lived in, full of soft textures and colors he remembered from their old apartment. That same scent of vanilla and books. Toys were tucked under the coffee table. A blanket fort stood half collapsed in the corner of the living room. A child's drawing of a rocket ship was pinned to the fridge with a magnet shaped like a turtle. It was chaos. It was beautiful. "You have a nice place," he said, scanning everything with gentle awe. "It's theirs more than mine now," she replied. "I just make sure they don't set it on fire." He almost smiled. "Where are they?" he asked softly, though the words caught in his throat. "School," she said. "I didn't want them here." "Not yet." He nodded, grateful and disappointed all at once. They sat on opposite sides of the couch. The air between them was thick with everything unsaid. "I'm sorry," he began. "For what?" she said, not cruelly, but with a flatness that made it harder. "For leaving, or for not knowing?" "For both," he said. She looked at him, tears threatening to break through. She didn't want to cry, not in front of him. "Not now. I found out I was pregnant 2 weeks after the divorce was final," she said. "I almost called. Every day I picked up the phone. But then I remembered your world, your schedule, your boardrooms, your need to control everything. And I thought, what if they're just another project to him?" "They wouldn't have been," he whispered. "Julia, if I'd known." "But you didn't," she said firmly, cutting him off. "And maybe that's my fault. But I had to choose what was right for them. I didn't want to raise them in a home full of resentment or absence. So I did it alone." Alexander looked down, ashamed. "They're amazing," she continued, her voice trembling now. "Liam wants to be a writer. Caleb is a whiz with numbers, and Ivy, she's the firecracker. She can read people better than I ever could." He smiled despite the lump in his throat. "They sound incredible." "They are." A long pause passed between them. "Do they know anything about me?" he asked. Julia shook her head. "They know their dad is gone?" "Not dead. Just not here." The words hit him harder than he expected. "I want to know them," he said quietly. "Even if it's hard, even if it takes time. I want to make things right." Julia looked at him for a long time. "I don't know if you can, Alex," she said. "But you can try. They deserve to know where they come from. But more than that, they deserve consistency. If you walk into their lives now, you can't walk out again." "I won't." "You said that once." Silence again. Then she stood and walked to a small drawer. She returned with 3 photos. One of each child. She handed them to him wordlessly. He stared at the images like they were sacred. His hands trembled. His eyes welled. Then Julia said quietly, Be here at 3:15 tomorrow. Ivy has a piano recital. She'd like a familiar face in the audience. Alexander looked up at her stunned. I'll be there, he whispered. You better be. Where Alexander attends his daughter's recital and hears her play for the first time. But something she says after the performance will break his heart. Alexander arrived 15 minutes early. The old church that hosted Ivy's piano recital wasn't far from Julia's house. It stood humbly between a flower shop and a second-hand bookstore, its bell tower chipped with age, the white paint peeling in places. Nothing about it screamed significance. Yet to Alexander, it felt like walking into a temple. He stepped inside the hall, blinking as his eyes adjusted to the warm glow of low, hanging lanterns and sunlight filtering through stained glass windows. Folding chairs were lined up in neat rows, filled with chattering parents, fidgeting children, and the occasional cough bouncing off the high ceiling. He spotted Julia sitting near the center, her hair pulled back, a soft blue dress hugging her frame. The two boys, Liam and Caleb, were beside her, dressed in matching button-ups and clip-on ties. He hesitated at the door, unsure if he should walk up. But then Julia looked over her shoulder and nodded, just once, an invitation. Alexander took a seat behind them. Close, but not too close. He couldn't stop staring at the children. Caleb, the youngest boy, leaned into Julia's shoulder, humming quietly to himself while fidgeting with the edge of a program. Liam, clearly the oldest, sat upright, glancing around the room with quiet observation. Every movement they made revealed more of himself. The way Liam tapped his foot impatiently, the way Caleb blinked long and slow when thinking. It was surreal. And then Ivy walked onto the stage. Alexander's breath caught in his throat. She was so small, dressed in a white dress with tiny blue flowers. Her brown curls bounced as she walked, and she carried herself with confidence far beyond her 6 years. She climbed onto the bench, adjusted it twice, then placed her fingers on the piano keys like she'd done it 1,000 times before. The room hushed. Her little feet couldn't reach the pedals, but her fingers, God, her fingers danced. Softly at first, like raindrops, then bolder, building into a melody that was tender and haunting all at once. It wasn't a children's song. It was something deeper, something aching. And Alexander realized with growing wonder that she had written it herself. The audience applauded as the last note faded. Ivy stood, bowed with theatrical grace, and trotted off the stage. Julia turned toward him slightly, her voice just above a whisper. She wrote that piece last week. She called it The Echo Tree. She said it's about people you miss even if you've never met them. Alexander's chest tightened. After the recital, everyone gathered in the back of the hall for lemonade and cookies. Children tugged on their parents' hands, showing off drawings and certificates. Alexander hung back, not wanting to intrude, until he saw Ivy holding her cup of juice like a miniature queen, accepting praise from a circle of adults. Then her eyes met his. She studied him for a long moment, her head tilting slightly. Then she whispered something to Julia, who nodded. Ivy walked straight toward him. Alexander knelt. Hey, she said, bold as brass. He replied, voice rougher than he wanted it to be. Are you Mommy's friend? I used to be, he said carefully. And I'd like to be again? She nodded thoughtfully, then asked, Are you the man from the picture? His heart stopped. What picture? The one in Mommy's drawer. She doesn't think I know about it, but I do. Ivy leaned in like she was telling a secret. You were smiling. But not like this. Alexander blinked, caught between shock and awe. What was I smiling like? Like your heart was big, but your eyes were sad. It was too much. He felt his throat tighten, tears pushing forward despite his desperate grip on them. She said you used to play the guitar, Ivy said. Do you still? He nodded slowly. Not in a long time. You should, she said simply. Music makes people real. Then she took his hand, small, warm, trusting, and said, Want to meet my brothers now? He couldn't speak. He just nodded. Ivy pulled him gently across the room, weaving through chairs and people, until they stood before Liam and Caleb. The boys looked up, confused but curious. This is the man from the picture, Ivy declared. Liam's brow furrowed. Caleb tilted his head. Julia walked over, standing behind them now, unsure of what to say. Alexander knelt again. Hey, he said, voice steady this time. My name is Alexander, and I've been waiting a long time to meet you. Caleb looked up at Julia, then back at him. Are you our dad? The room seemed to go silent. Julia's breath hitched. Alexander looked at her, searching, and she gave the smallest, faintest nod. He turned back to the children. Yes, he said. I am. Liam stared at him. Why didn't you come sooner? Alexander's eyes filled. I didn't know I was supposed to, he whispered. But I'm here now, and I'll never leave again, if you let me stay. The boys didn't say anything. Not yet. But neither walked away. Alexander spends time with his children for the first time. But when Ivy falls sick at school, he rushes to the hospital, and what the doctor says reveals something terrifying. For the first time in his adult life, Alexander Wolfe didn't check his emails for an entire day. No stock updates. No emergency meetings. No 20-slide presentations begging for approval. Instead, he found himself sitting cross-legged on the hardwood floor of Julia's living room, a toy dinosaur in one hand and a Nerf dart stuck to his forehead. Caleb was giggling uncontrollably. "You're extinct." The boy shouted triumphantly, holding the plastic blaster like a knight with a sword. Alexander laughed, genuinely, freely, for the first time in what felt like years. The sound surprised even him. It didn't come from habit. It came from joy. Real, uncomplicated joy. Liam was sitting nearby, assembling a Lego spaceship. Focused, methodical, hands quick and precise, just like his. Ivy was curled on the couch, scribbling something in a sketchbook. Every now and then, she looked up, studying his face like she was trying to memorize it. Julia watched quietly from the kitchen, stirring a pot of soup, arms folded. She hadn't said much all day. She didn't have to. Her silence wasn't cold. It was wary, cautious. A mother who had learned to trust herself more than anyone else. But something in her eyes had softened. Just a little. Later that afternoon, Ivy tugged on Alexander's hand. "Come see my fort," she whispered. She led him down the hall to her room, walls covered in paper butterflies and hand-painted stars. In the corner, a crooked little fortress made of blankets, chairs, and stuffed animals guarded a pink flashlight and a diary with a lock. She climbed inside and patted the space beside her. "Mummy's too big for this," she whispered. "But I think you can fit." So he crawled in, nearly knocking the whole thing over. Inside, she showed him drawings, stick figures of her Caleb, Liam, and one more. A man with gray eyes and brown hair, smiling in a way that reached his heart. "That one's you," she said. "You drew me," he asked softly. "I did last week. I think I knew you were coming." His chest tightened again. How did this little girl carry so much light? Then her nose wrinkled. "I feel funny," she mumbled, placing a hand on her stomach. Alexander frowned. "Funny how?" She shrugged. "Just warm and spinny." He reached out. Her forehead was clammy, her cheeks flushed. "Let's get Mom," he said. But as he tried to move, Ivy leaned against him suddenly, her breath shallow. "Daddy?" she whispered, for the first time, and then collapsed against his chest. Everything after that was a blur. Julia screamed when she saw him carrying Ivy out of the room. Liam and Caleb stood frozen, wide-eyed. Alexander's voice was steady, but his hands were shaking as he buckled her into the back seat of Julia's car. "I'll drive," he said. Julia didn't argue. At the hospital, the fluorescent lights buzzed. Time twisted itself into knots as they waited. Ivy was taken inside. Alexander tried not to panic when they told them she was being put on fluids, as a precaution. That word, precaution, had never sounded so vague, so fragile. A nurse approached, clipboard in hand. "We need her medical history," she said. Julia nodded and started listing allergies, vaccines, birth stats. Then the nurse turned to Alexander. "Are you the father?" He swallowed. "Yes." "We'll need a genetic background from you. Any hereditary conditions, family illnesses." Alexander blinked. "I don't know." Julia turned, startled. "I mean, I know some of it," he corrected quickly. "But I never met most of my father's family. He died young. My mother never spoke of them." The nurse nodded and walked away. Julia looked at him, suddenly pale. "You don't know your full medical history?" she asked. "No." "Why?" And she didn't answer. Minutes later, the doctor came. "Ivy's stable," he said. "But we're running more tests. Her fever spiked too fast, and her oxygen saturation dropped briefly. Has she had any seizures in the past?" Julia froze. "No." The doctor continued. "We're ruling out a rare mitochondrial disorder. It can be genetic, passed from either parent. Has your family had anything like that?" Alexander's blood ran cold. "No," he whispered. "But like I said, I don't know all of it." The doctor nodded gravely. "We'll keep her overnight, just in case." Julia sat down hard on the bench. Alexander leaned against the wall, head in his hands. His empire couldn't save her. His money couldn't speed the test results. His influence couldn't protect her tiny, shivering body in that hospital bed. "I should have known," he said quietly. "I should have been there from the beginning." Julia looked at him, tired, vulnerable. "We'll deal with this together," she said softly. It was the first time she had used "we." Then the doctor returned. "We need to talk," he said, "in private." The doctor reveals a family secret hidden in Alexander's DNA, one that could change Ivy's life forever, and maybe threaten her future. The hospital hallway stretched like a tunnel, long, cold, and painfully quiet. Alexander followed the doctor into a small consultation room with pale green walls and a round table that looked too cheerful for what was surely bad news. Julia trailed close behind, her arms crossed tightly against her chest as if bracing herself against a storm. The doctor shut the door gently, then turned to face them, his face unreadable. "I want to preface what I'm about to say by emphasizing that we're still running a full panel of tests," he began, "but preliminary signs point to a mitochondrial condition, more specifically M&G syndrome." Julia's breath hitched. Alexander stared blankly. What is that? It's rare, the doctor explained. A genetic disorder that impacts mitochondrial function, the energy production inside cells. It can cause fatigue, muscle weakness, digestive issues, neurological problems, seizures, like the one Ivy may have experienced. Alexander's mind raced, but she's been healthy. Children with early signs can seem healthy for years, the doctor said gently. Then symptoms appear gradually, often misdiagnosed or dismissed as growing pains or anxiety. This spike in fever and sudden fatigue, especially combined with her low oxygen levels, was a red flag. That's why we asked about family history. Julia's hand found the edge of the table. What causes it? The doctor looked at Alexander. It's inherited. Recessive. Both parents must carry a mutated gene. Julia's tests show she's a carrier, but not symptomatic. We're now running genetic tests on Ivy to confirm whether she inherited both copies. And me? Alexander asked, throat dry. That's the part we don't yet know, the doctor replied. But if Ivy tests positive, it means you're also a carrier. And if you are, your other children could be at risk too. The weight of those words landed like a boulder. Alexander felt like the walls were closing in. Julia sat down, her fingers trembling. But she's just a little girl. The doctor's eyes softened. We're not assuming the worst. Early detection helps. If it's confirmed, we begin supportive treatments immediately. Medications, nutritional support, and therapies. There's no cure yet, but there's research. Trials, hope. Hope, Alexander repeated numbly. You mean a gamble? I mean a chance, the doctor replied firmly. A knock interrupted them. A nurse peeked in. She's awake. The Julia was up in an instant. But Alexander lingered, shoulders heavy, eyes far away. Mr. Wolfe, the doctor said quietly before he left. You'll need to be tested too today. The sooner the better. Alexander nodded, then followed Julia down the hall. Ivy was lying in the hospital bed, dwarfed by tubes and wires, but her eyes lit up when she saw them. Hey, she whispered, voice raspy but smiling. Julia rushed to her side, brushing a curl from her forehead, pressing a kiss to her temple. You scared us, baby, she whispered, voice breaking. I'm okay, Ivy replied bravely. I just felt spinny again, but they gave me juice and stickers. Alexander stood at the foot of the bed, uncertain. Daddy? Ivy asked, her voice small. His chest clenched. I'm here, he said, stepping closer. How are you feeling? Cold, she replied. But not scared. He smiled. You're the bravest girl I've ever met. And she reached out a hand and he took it. Julia watched silently, emotion swirling behind her tired eyes. In that moment, something invisible passed between them. Not forgiveness, not yet. But unity. They sat by Ivy's bed for hours. Liam and Caleb arrived later with Julia's neighbor, their faces pale, eyes wide. They tiptoed in, unsure, until Ivy flashed a sleepy smile and waved her fingers. Then they rushed forward, burying her in soft hugs and whispered promises. Alexander stepped back to give them space, but Liam turned to him suddenly. Is she going to be okay? He crouched beside him. We don't know everything yet, but the doctors are helping, and I'm not leaving her. Liam looked at him for a long moment, then nodded once. Later, Alexander stood by the window, watching the sunset behind gray clouds. Julia joined him, arms folded tightly again. She doesn't deserve this, she said, her voice barely audible. No, he agreed. None of you do. I protected them from you, she said, finally looking at him. I thought I was doing the right thing. But now I wonder, what if I'd told you sooner? What if we had caught this earlier? It's not your fault, he said gently. But it feels like it is. He placed a hand on the windowsill beside hers, not touching, just near. I don't want to be a guest in their lives anymore, he said. Let me help. Let me stay. Julia looked at him, eyes glossy, full of old wounds and new hope. She didn't answer. But she didn't pull away. A nurse returned moments later. Mr. Wolfe, the lab is ready for your test. Alexander nodded. He turned to Ivy and whispered, I'll be right back. She blinked slowly. Okay, but hurry. I want to show you my new drawing. He smiled. I wouldn't miss it. As he followed the nurse down the hall toward the genetic testing lab, Alexander felt his pulse thrum with something unfamiliar, not fear, not control. Responsibility, real, raw, irrevocable responsibility. Alexander's genetic test comes back, and the truth forces Julia to reveal a buried family secret of her own, one that explains why she really left him. The results came back 3 days later. Alexander stood alone in the hospital's private consultation room, the same room where the word MGE syndrome had first shattered his world. Now it waited to define his future again. The folder on the table looked deceptively thin, just a few sheets of paper, but holding the weight of a lifetime. Dr. Sinclair entered quietly, the same careful expression on his face. Calm, unreadable. He sat across from Alexander, placed the folder between them and folded his hands. Or said, Wolfe, he began, we received your genetic screening results. I'll be direct, you are a carrier of the TYMP gene mutation. The same one we found in Julia. Alexander exhaled through his nose, steady but shaken. So Ivy, Dr. Sinclair nodded. Ivy inherited both mutated genes. She has MNG-Bailly syndrome. The room darkened, or maybe it was just his vision tunneling. How bad is it? He asked quietly. She's in the early stages. That's the good news. Many children don't get diagnosed until much later, which delays treatment. Because we've caught it now, we can begin dietary interventions, therapy, and ongoing monitoring, and we'll refer her to a mitochondrial specialist. But, he paused, it's progressive and unpredictable. Alexander stared at his hands. For the first time in years, they looked fragile. Not the hands of a billionaire. The hands of a man watching his child's future slip through his fingers. I'll pay whatever it takes, he said quickly. Private treatment, clinical trials. Anything. Dr. Sinclair nodded. Money will help. Access is a huge part of treatment. But this will take more than resources. It'll take presence, consistency, emotional stability. Ivy will need strength, from both of you. Alexander nodded once slowly. She'll have it, I swear. The doctor closed the folder and stood. We'll schedule a full plan with you and Julia. Together. Later that evening, Alexander returned to the brownstone. Ivy was napping on the couch, Caleb and Liam quietly playing a board game beside her. Julia was in the kitchen, stirring something that simmered slowly, filling the room with warmth and cinnamon. He hesitated in the doorway, watching her from behind. Can we talk? He asked. She didn't turn around. You got the results? Yes, he said. She has it. Julia nodded slowly, her shoulders sagging, as though the truth had finally crushed whatever strength she had left to hold up. I'm so sorry, he whispered. She turned then, leaning against the counter, her eyes glassy. It's not your fault. It never was. Alexander stepped closer. There's something else, isn't there? Julia looked away. You knew she was sick before the recital? He said gently. Didn't you? She nodded. I didn't know it was this. But yes, I knew something was wrong. The fevers. The sudden exhaustion. I told myself it was just stress or low iron. But in my gut I knew. Why didn't you tell me? He asked, not accusing, just wounded. Her voice cracked. Because the last time I trusted someone with my fear, they ran. Alexander's chest tightened. I didn't run. You disappeared, she whispered. You buried yourself in boardrooms and billion-dollar dreams. I was drowning and you didn't see it. So I stopped asking to be rescued. There it was. The thing she'd never said, the real reason she left. Alexander looked down ashamed. I thought I was building something for us. For the future. You were building something for yourself, she said, not cruelly, but honestly. And I couldn't raise children in the shadows of your ambition. He looked at her, eyes red. I get it now. Everything, and I'm not that man anymore. I want to believe that, she said. But this isn't about us. It's about Ivy, about all three of them. He stepped forward closer. Then let me help. Let me stand beside you this time, not behind a desk, not behind a lawyer. Just me, as their father. Julia looked into his eyes. The pain was still there, but so was something else. Hope. Do you know what it means to really stay? She asked. Not just show up for the big moments, the piano recitals, the birthdays, but the hard days. The days when Ivy can't walk without help. When Liam lashes out because he doesn't understand why his sister is sick. When Caleb starts crying and won't say why. Can you stay through that, Alex? He didn't hesitate. Yes, he said. She watched him for a long time. Then she nodded and something inside her finally unraveled. A knot that had been tangled for years. She let herself lean into his chest. Not fully. Just a little enough. Alexander wrapped his arms around her. Not to fix her. Not to promise a perfect ending. But to be present, to finally show up. From the living room, a small voice called out, Mommy, Daddy, I finished my picture. Julia stepped back, wiping her eyes. Come on, she said. Let's go see. They walked into the room and Ivy, still wrapped in a blanket, held up a drawing. It was their family, stick figures again. But this time all 5 of them. Together. And in the middle, Ivy had written in big purple letters, no one is missing anymore. As Alexander tries to bond with Liam and Caleb, he discovers a letter Julia once wrote, one she never intended him to see, and it changes everything he thought he knew about their past. The days that followed moved like waves, some soft, some crashing, all reshaping the shoreline of Alexander Wolfe's life. He was still learning how to be a father. Some mornings, he arrived at Julia's brownstone before the kids were even awake, quietly brewing coffee in her kitchen while Julia gave him sleepy side eyes from the hallway. Other mornings, he walked Ivy to the park, her tiny hand swinging in his as she pointed out every squirrel, every cracked sidewalk, every cloud that reminded her of a cat. The nights were hardest. That was when Ivy's fatigue worsened, when her hands shook, when Caleb curled up beside her and refused to sleep until she did. Liam, ever the protector, sat at the edge of the bed pretending to read, but Alexander could see it in his eyes, the fear, unspoken and heavy, like something hiding in a closet he didn't want to open. Alexander had spent decades mastering the language of mergers, profits, and power. But these children spoke in silence, sideways glances, and half-finished questions. He was still translating. One cloudy afternoon, while Ivy napped and Julia ran out to the pharmacy, Alexander found himself alone with Liam and Caleb. The living room was quiet except for the soft tapping of Lego bricks and the occasional hum of a car outside. Liam didn't look up when Alexander sat beside him on the floor. "You're building a spaceship?" Alexander asked. Liam shrugged. "It's not for flying. It's for hiding." "Hiding from what?" Liam didn't answer. Instead, he pressed a small Lego door into the center of the ship and said, "From things that can't be fixed." Alexander felt a lump rise in his throat. "I know what that feels like," he said gently. "When I was a kid, I used to build things just to feel like I could control something." Liam turned, finally meeting his eyes. "Did you build things when you left Mom?" Alexander hesitated. The truth weighed more than he expected. "I didn't leave her the way you think," he said slowly, "but I also didn't fight hard enough to stay. I thought building a better future meant building it alone." Liam looked down again. "That's dumb." Alexander smiled softly. "Yeah, it was," Caleb piped up suddenly. "Are you going to marry Mommy again?" Liam groaned. "Shut up, Caleb. I was just asking." Caleb whined. Alexander chuckled. "I don't think that's something we can build with Legos, buddy." Caleb blinked. "Why not?" "Because it takes more than blocks. It takes time. And trust." Just then, a loud thunk came from the hallway. Alexander stood, following the noise. The kids trailed behind. He found the source quickly. An old box that had fallen off the top shelf of a closet Julia must have been cleaning earlier. A few books had spilled out, along with a tangle of photo albums, old birthday cards, and a sealed envelope. It had his name on it. In Julia's handwriting. It wasn't nude. The ink had faded. The edges were yellowing slightly. He turned it over. It hadn't been opened. He knew he shouldn't read it. But he also knew this was a piece of the past he never got to hear. The boys had already wandered back to the living room, unaware. Alexander sat on the edge of the bed and opened it. "Alex, if you're reading this, I guess I either finally found the courage to give it to you, or you found it on your own. You always said I was the brave one. You were wrong. I just loved harder. You protected yourself with logic. I led with my heart. And when it broke big. I didn't leave because I stopped loving you. I left because I couldn't raise children in a home where I felt invisible. Every time I told you I was drowning, you handed me an anchor made of your dreams. I know you didn't mean to. But that's how it felt. And when I found out I was pregnant, I sat on the floor for hours holding the test in my hand, whispering your name like it might bring you back. It didn't. I wanted to tell you. God, I did. 1,000 times. But every time I reached for the phone, I remembered the coldness in your eyes that last night, how you told me, some things matter more than love. I knew then you'd already chosen. So I chose too. If you ever find this, know that you were never unloved. Just unread, unheard, and maybe now you'll listen." Julia Alexander sat still, the letter resting in his lap like a confession and a prayer. He could hear the kids laughing faintly in the next room. A tear slid down his cheek. She hadn't stopped loving him. She had just run out of places to pour that love where it wouldn't drown her. He folded the letter slowly and placed it back in the envelope. Just then, Julia walked in carrying a paper bag. "You're home," he said quietly. She looked at the letter in his hands and froze. "You found it." "I did. I'm never meant for you two." "I'm glad I read it," he interrupted softly. Julia looked at him, not with fear, but with vulnerability. She waited. Alexander stood and stepped closer. "You were right, Julia. I chose wrong back then. But I'm here now, and I'm listening." As she searched his eyes, as if trying to see if the man she once loved still lived inside him. And slowly, she nodded. For the first time, she let her guard drop, just a little more. Ivy suddenly loses strength in both legs during a routine morning. And as Alexander races her to the hospital, he realizes the price of time wasted might be higher than he ever imagined. The morning began with sunlight. Ivy sat at the kitchen table in her favorite unicorn pajamas, humming to herself as she colored in a workbook. Caleb was still upstairs, dragging his feet about getting dressed. Liam was reading quietly, curled into the couch like a boy twice his age. Julia poured coffee. Alexander was flipping pancakes, trying to keep one from burning. It felt, for a moment, like something close to normal. Then Ivy said, "Daddy, I can't feel my toes." Everything stopped. Alexander turned. Julia froze mid-pour. He walked over quickly, kneeling beside her chair. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" Ivy frowned, wiggling her legs under the table. "They're sleepy. But not like before. This time they're gone." The Julia was already moving, checking her forehead, reaching for the phone. Alexander gently lifted Ivy from the chair and placed her feet on the ground. "Try standing up for me, okay?" Ivy looked unsure but nodded. She pushed with her tiny legs. Nothing. Her knees buckled. She would have collapsed if Alexander hadn't caught her. Julia gasped. Ivy? Alexander said softly, heart racing. Can you try again? Tears filled her eyes now. I can't. Daddy, I can't feel them. He looked at Julia. She was already dialing the hospital. They didn't wait for an ambulance this time. The drive was a blur of red lights and horn blasts. Ivy lay in Julia's lap in the back seat, her head resting on her mother's chest, her voice growing quieter with every breath. Alexander ran red lights he never would have dared cross in another life. When they reached the hospital, nurses were already waiting. Ivy was lifted onto a gurney, her legs dangling limply. Her eyes found Alexander's just before they turned the corner. I'm scared, she whispered. I'm right here, he promised, running beside the gurney until they disappeared through the double doors. Then silence. Alexander stood in the hallway, hands on his head, chest heaving. Julia leaned against the wall, shaking. She looked like she might collapse. I should have brought her in sooner, she whispered. I should have known yesterday when she tripped coming down the stairs. I thought she was tired. It's not your fault, Alexander said quickly, placing a hand on her shoulder. Her eyes filled with tears. I kept telling myself we were winning. That maybe she'd grow out of it. That if we just kept smiling, she wouldn't get worse. We didn't know, he said. But we'll fight it now. Then a doctor appeared. Not Dr. Sinclair. A neurologist. Older, glasses perched low on his nose, his expression serious but not cruel. Ivy is stable, he said. But she's experiencing what we call acute neuromuscular regression. It means her body is no longer sending signals to certain muscle groups, in this case, her lower extremities. Julia covered her mouth. It's not permanent. The doctor continued, but it could become that way without intervention. We're adjusting her treatment immediately. New supplements, steroids, physical therapy. Will she walk again? Alexander asked. The doctor hesitated. That depends on her response to treatment. And on time. Alexander blinked. What do you mean? She needed this support weeks ago. Her cells are failing faster than we expected. We can slow it. But we can't reverse damage that's already done. A cold silence fell over them. Then the doctor added, she asked for you both. She's awake. Inside the room, Ivy looked so small in the sea of white sheets and blinking monitors. Her legs were motionless under the blanket. Her fingers were curled tightly around her pink stuffed rabbit. She tried to smile when they entered. She whispered. Did I ruin breakfast? The Julia rushed to her side, brushing back her curls. You didn't ruin anything, baby. You scared us, that's all. Ivy looked at Alexander. Am I going to be okay? He crouched beside her bed and took her hand. Yes, he said. We're going to do everything we can. And we're going to do it together. Even if I can't walk. Even if you fly, he said softly. That made her giggle a little. I can't fly, Daddy? You don't know that yet, he whispered. Ivy closed her eyes for a moment, her hand still clutching his. Then she said something that shattered them both. Do people still love you when you're broken? Julia broke first, pressing her lips to Ivy's forehead, shaking. Alexander blinked back tears and said, You're not broken. You're the strongest person I know, and yes, people love you even more when they see how brave you are. Ivy nodded sleepily. The machines beeped gently. Julia reached for Alexander's hand without thinking. He held it tight. Outside the world continued, cars, Lev's laughter. But in that little room, time stood still. A family, once fractured, now piecing itself together, sat side by side in quiet, sacred unity. And as Alexander stared at his daughter's still legs and her brave little face, he whispered a promise to himself. You will not go through this without me again. At Ivy's request, the family attends a special music recital at her school, where she performs in a wheelchair. What happens afterward will change Alexander's life, and her future, forever. It was raining the day of the recital. Not the kind of rain that keeps people home, but the kind that felt cinematic. Soft, steady, as if the sky itself had paused to listen. Julia helped Ivy into her navy blue dress, smoothing the creases with practiced care. Her legs, still unresponsive, were tucked gently into the new wheelchair the hospital had provided just a few days earlier. It was too big for her, and she joked that it made her look like a space pilot. Alexander stood at the doorway, holding an umbrella, watching the moment with a heaviness and a pride he couldn't begin to name. You look beautiful, Ivy, he said. She twirled her curls with one hand and smiled. Are you nervous? He blinked. Me? She nodded seriously. First family recital. It's a big deal, he chuckled. Terrified. Good, she said with a wink. The school auditorium buzzed with chatter and the squeaking of shoes on polished wood floors. Children huddled with their music sheets, parents checked their phones, and folding chairs clicked beneath shifting weight. In the front row sat Julia, Caleb, and Liam, the family that had grown stronger with every battle. Alexander stood at the edge of the stage with Ivy, his hand on her small shoulder. She held her sheet music in her lap, legs still and stiller, but her eyes were burning bright with something fierce and tender. She looked up at him. Daddy, she asked. Yes, sweet girl. If I mess up, will people still clap? He crouched beside her, voice shaking just slightly. Even if you play nothing at all, you'll get a standing ovation. Because you're not here to prove anything. You're here because your heart still sings. And that's more than enough. She stared at him for a moment, then whispered, Okay, I'm ready. He wheeled her to the center of the stage as the teacher introduced her. This next piece is an original composition titled Rainlight by Ivy Whitman. The applause was warm, supportive. Alexander stepped back just out of view as Ivy adjusted the sheet on the music stand and rolled up to the small upright piano. For a moment, the entire room went still. Then her fingers began to move. Soft, hesitant notes filled the air, delicate as raindrops on glass, then bolder, deeper. The melody climate curled and unfolded like something ancient remembered. It wasn't just music. It was storytelling. The notes spoke of fear of falling, of learning to live with what can't be changed. They spoke of a little girl who lost the ground beneath her feet, but never lost her light. Julia was crying before the first verse ended. Liam leaned his head on her shoulder. Caleb whispered, She's magic. Alexander stood frozen, not in awe, but in reverence. This was more than a recital, it was a resurrection. When Ivy played the final note, the room exploded into applause. But Ivy didn't turn around right away. She closed her eyes, as if finishing a prayer. Then she took a breath and slowly turned her wheelchair to face the audience. And stood. No one breathed. Julia gasped aloud. Ivy's legs wobbled like paper, her hands gripping the wheels for balance, but she stood. For 3 seconds. Then she collapsed back into the chair, shaking. The applause that followed wasn't polite. It was thunderous, filled with something primal, something sacred. Everyone rose to their feet. Every parent, every child, every teacher. The teacher sobbed openly behind the podium. Caleb clapped until his hands hurt. Liam grinned wider than he had in months. And Alexander, he stepped on stage and knelt in front of her, eyes filled with tears. You flew, he whispered. I did, Ivy whispered back. Just a little. Later, when the recital ended and the crowd thinned, Alexander found himself outside the school under the drizzle, holding Ivy's wheelchair umbrella while she rested. You okay? He asked. She nodded. My legs are angry, but my heart feels good. He smiled. That was the bravest thing I've ever seen. I wanted to show you I'm not broken, she said softly. He crouched beside her, eye level. You never were. But today you reminded everyone what strength looks like. She studied his face. Are you going to stay forever? He didn't hesitate. Yes. Until you're tired of me. I won't be, she said confidently. Behind them, Julia came down the steps slowly. Liam and Caleb were chasing raindrops, laughing umbrellas long forgotten. Julia looked at him. I saw the way you looked at her, she said. Like she saved you. She did, he replied. They all did. She nodded, then reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small envelope. I was going to wait, but after today, I think you should have this. He took it carefully. Inside was a birth certificate, Ivy's, and below her name where the father's name had once been left blank it had been changed. Father Alexander Wolfe. His breath caught. She asked me to do it last night, Julia said. She said, I want the whole world to know who my dad is. Alexander looked at the paper, then at Ivy, who was now singing to herself under the umbrella. He felt something deep inside him settle. Not an ending, but a beginning. He reached for Julia's hand. Thank you for giving me this chance. For letting me fix what I broke. You didn't fix it, she said softly. You earned it. As they walked toward the car, the rain began to fall a little harder. Not cold, but gentle, like a blessing. And for the first time in years, Alexander Wolfe didn't feel lost in the storm. He felt home.
He was a billionaire who had everything except love. He thought his past was buried until he saw his ex-wife with 3 children who looked just like him. And in a hospital room, beside a little girl in a wheelchair, he discovered the truth. He was their father. This is a story of loss, forgiveness, and a man who finally learned what it means to come home